Hey, shalom, guys. Welcome to another interview special. I'm joined by, which way am I going? I'm going this way. Rabbi Asher Meza. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, if you guys don't know who Rabbi Asher is, you should. He's popular on YouTube, popular on TikTok. Always have conversations about Judaism, conservativeness, and everything like that. So, Asher, we've talked a lot. You always bring a very interesting perspective on the Torah, on the Bible itself, and I love how you really look at the Torah for what it is. You just don't go with the majority um commentaries and descriptions of the Torah. You kind of give your 2 cents, and almost hearing you is kind of like reading something like from the Midrash, where Rabbi Isaac says something else, but then Rabbi Asher says this.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like you always give an interesting perspective, and we will obviously go in through this with the interview too. But I think one of the things I really appreciate about you is I hear a lot of Jews and Christians arguing about oh, don't be a Christian because of this, and you are the first Jew that I've ever heard bring up that no, it's better for someone to be a Christian than to be an atheist, and that really hit me, and I was like, you have a point there. You have a point there for someone to abandon religion altogether. I'd rather have my children be 100% like Orthodox Jewish and
Mm.
not Christian or believe in a Messiah at all, but still retain the laws and the ordinances and to like abandon it altogether. So when I've heard you kind of talk about that, that was one of the things I'm just like, wow, I've never thought of it like that. It's really interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we have to realize what really unites us as religious people. And I think many religions have this confused. I've heard Christians say, well, if you're not going to be saved from a Christian perspective, you might as well be atheist, right? Just like you just said, there's Jews who make no distinction in terms of how lost someone could be. If you're not Jewish, you might as well be this, right? I think we have a very short memory of how kind Christians have been to us and how horrible atheists have been. Now, for sure, the question is, how far do you want to go back? If your criteria of decency is 1,000 years ago, right? It's kind of hard to argue with that. But in our generation, or even in the previous generation, to say that in some way Jews have suffered more under the hands of Christians than atheists, just really means that you don't know history. And I think within Jewish history itself, recent Jewish history, we know about the rebbes that were tortured by the Jewish communist police, right? The censorship that's typically coming out of the left in this country that stops you from saying anything positive about Israel, right? The left is not our friend, right? I'm not saying that traditionally Christianity and Judaism has had some sort of love affair, but in life, like I always say, the choice is not between what's horrific and what's utopian, but what's good and what's better. And it's better for someone to adopt some biblically based existence, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or even ethical forms of Islam, than atheism.
Yeah, and I think that's, a lot of people will hear that, and be confused, but I think if you really think about it, it makes sense. But let's go in really quick. Let's introduce yourself, where people can find you on YouTube, your handles and everything, and then let's go into your journey to where you started to where you are now as a rabbi.
Mhm. So my name is Asher Meza, based out of South Florida. I was born Catholic. My family's from Colombia. I don't think we have a Jewish heritage. If I did, I'd probably lie and tell people that I didn't, just to let people know that if I can do it, if I could become Jewish, become a rabbi, become hopefully influential online, you could do the same. It has nothing to do with pedigree. But yes, I converted to Judaism around 25 years ago. Before converting to Judaism, I was Christian, right? My family, or for the most part, my mother became Protestant at the age of when I was 12. And then I returned to religion around 17 and a half, 18. And then I delved in to Christianity, went to seminary. And just to fast forward, I still feel that I have the same love affair with God, that the same love affair I have now, I had back then as a Christian. I feel I worship the same God. But I came to the conclusion for myself that God wasn't Jesus, and Jesus wasn't the Messiah. And I asked myself, where do I go from here? Well, I guess from that perspective, Judaism was thrust upon me, and I converted to Judaism. I moved to Israel. I learned in yeshiva. I lived in Israel for 5 years. I worked in Jerusalem and different parts of Israel as an outreach worker for Jeff Seidel, Avram, and other organizations. And then I came back to America. I used to be the assistant rabbi of Young Israel of Richmond, Virginia. I had my own synagogue in North Miami Beach for around 4 years called Birkat Avraham. And now I am strictly online. I've been doing this for over 20 years, teaching Torah online. And yes, I do something that I think it's unique to most Jews, to most rabbis. I encourage people to consider becoming Jewish. I don't look for people to convert. I try to get them to the point that they would love Torah and God enough that they would want to convert. And yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of haters. I have a lot of people who like what I do, and I've stopped grading myself. I just sort of keep moving forward and slashing away. So that's how we do it.
Right. So it's interesting. So you came to the conclusion that Jesus is not God, which I actually agree with you on. But then you also said that you came to the conclusion that Jesus is not the Messiah, which I would disagree with you on. But how did you kind of come to those like conclusions? Like where in the Bible, like were you reading that kind of came with those ideas?
Mhm. Well, just let me make this clear. I'm not against somebody, or I wouldn't write someone off or say that God doesn't validate you only because you believe Jesus is God, or only because you believe Jesus is the Messiah. I think these are secondary points. I think someone could come to that conclusion and not violate any Torah command. I personally, I teach that it's not what you claim to believe in, it's what you can defend. And it's not that I can't defend Jesus being God or Jesus being the Messiah. It's kind of hard to defend from a Torah perspective the reliance, the religious reliance on the office of the Messiah. It's kind of hard to defend that. It's kind of hard to defend a lot of metaphysical ideas that one has to ask, what does the Messiah have to do with metaphysics? Well, nowadays, just ask the average Orthodox Jew to explain his rendition of the Messiah. It's probably at least 70% metaphysical. Everything metaphysical has to be grounded in Torah. And it seems to me that the idea of the Messiah is an idea, as it's taught in Orthodoxy and in Christianity today, not really grounded in the Messiah. So when I read the New Testament, I read a book made up of, in my opinion, later developed ideas similar, like the Quran, similar to rabbinic literature, compared to what God specifically required us to believe in the Torah. And I believe in the oral law, and I believe in Orthodox Judaism. I'm an Orthodox Jew. However, for me, oral law only contains law and nothing metaphysical from an authoritative perspective. So I kind of felt like less was more. I was building so much on the notion of the Messiah, that I just felt like, you know what? According to the Torah, I'm justified by keeping commandments and commandments alone, right? Like clearly under like a healthy, um, like faithful, like connection with God, and everything else should be considered optional. So I I also think that things that are optional to believe are not worth making sense of.
Okay, that makes sense. So then, you know, okay, so that's why you left Christianity because you kind of had those different ideas. But why like Judaism? Because I feel like Islam kind of views the same thing. Like they also don't agree that Jesus is God. I don't know if will say Jesus is the Messiah, but like what specifically attracted you to Judaism then?
I think Judaism is the backbone, if not somewhat of the same religion as Christianity. It's essentially Christianity without Jesus and Paul. That's pretty much what it is, plus laws. While Islam embraces Jesus, adds other characters and other events. So like if someone stops believing in the notion of the Messiah and Jesus, there's no way that he's going to become Muslim or Mormon. He would either become a Noahide, which I think is a waste of potential, or a Jew, whether a Karaite, Orthodox, whatever. Yeah, there's no way to move forward. All you can really do from that perspective is fall back.
Okay. Now, regarding the concept of Messiah, just because I know I've heard you talk about this before, where we don't see the concept of Messiah within the first five books, like the Torah itself, from Genesis to Deuteronomy. So, like, how did the concept of Messiah like develop over time? because it's interesting because like even like within like the Midrash and the Talmud, like rabbis have brought up phrases like in Zechariah, like writing on a cult, like I believe it's in the Midrash, where it's like, that's referring to the Messiah. Like, how do they randomly? It's like they almost pull it out of thin air. So like, how did this come up?
Yeah. So there are foreshadowings from an Orthodox and a Messianic perspective in the Torah, foreshadowings, what people would consider remez, on this messianic figure, right? But because it's not literally there, you could say it's anybody. You could say it's really talking about something else, or perhaps people are interpreting these terms incorrectly. I think that the idea of the Messiah, as it's understood today, is a very corrosive idea. It's one of the most destructive ideas to ever enter the Jewish world. And when I say Jewish world, I include Christianity, because I view Christianity or Messianic Judaism just like another form of Kabbalistic Judaism. It's caused more division. I mean, the bigger question is, how would the religious Jewish world look without the notion of the Messiah? And the answer is a lot more unified, a lot more unified, on an idea that by believing or not believing in it doesn't change how you keep one law. One law, right? I mean, there's a saying that goes, was it roses are red, violets are bluish. If it wasn't for Paul, we'd all be Jewish, right? I think it was Saul, um, like Saul Baron, who says that 10% of the Roman Empire were converts to Judaism. We were in the right trajectory. The world was becoming Jewish. And because of this idea of the Messiah, and not necessarily that it was the fault of the Nazarenes, right? Because if the rabbis would have just given in, right, then we still could have progressed. So regardless, they both contributed to the problem. But it seems that the notion of the Messiah, even today, is what separates Torah believers more than any other idea. And from a Torah perspective, it seems to be so trivial, meaning it doesn't matter. Essentially, it's about Torah observance, and God says that we'll be His special people on the basis of either keeping or not keeping laws. So uh, there's a few things I think hurt us more than it ever helped us in the Torah world. One is the belief in the Messiah, or the requirement, right? Because someone could believe in it, but they wouldn't exclude you from it unless they feel that they have the final interpretation of who this Messiah is. And two, the the elevation of the writings and the prophets to the level of Torah and authoritativeness. Meaning now I can try to justify what I believe, not because what literally appears in the Torah, but because of some poetry, you know, or symbolism in the prophets that essentially gave birth to Kabbalistic Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
Okay, so how is your different view of how is your view of Messiah? Let's just say different than more of Orthodox Judaism, and then how is the concept of Messiah different between Orthodox Jews and Christians and how they view it?
So I validate Messianic Judaism. I'm clearly not a Messianic Jew. It's kind of hard to validate Christianity because that already becomes like a different religion, just because we don't have Torah in common anymore.
Right.
Now, how do I differ from the average, I don't know, Chabadnik on who the Messiah is? So, in terms of Mashiach, like Mashach means like to be anointed with oil physically. The idea of anointing kings, as you know, doesn't appear in the five books of Moses. It seems to have been a later rabbinic um, inaction idea. Now, if anything appears in the prophets or the writings, I'm all automatically going to consider that rabbinic, just because when I say rabbi, I mean judges. It was something instituted by the judges. There had to be some consensus, like, hey, we're going to start anointing kings like other nations did before. So, from that perspective, every king that enters Israel is anointed into service. And later on, we see that prophets get anointed, right? Like the phrase is used for non-Jewish individuals who have a specific mission or task on this planet. So from that perspective, you can say that um, when we acquire the king that we're waiting for, that king is going to be anointed into service, and he is going to be a Messiah or the Messiah, interchangeable. And that's actually what Maimonides brings down in Sefer HaMitzvot. His command for believing in the Messiah is the command to establish a king. I believe in the end of Deuteronomy chapter 17. He says the command the Torah gives us to establish a king is the Torah's command for us to believe in a Messiah. Now, from a Torah perspective, it seems to be almost like an optional thing. Like when you want a king, you shall pick the one I elect, or vice versa. But that's the root of the idea, according to Maimonides. Now, in his other works, he makes a distinction between the actual Messiah and just kings in general. But yes, he acknowledges that the Messiah is a king, but a king that has to come through Solomon and David. While a king could, any other king could come from any tribe, and on and on. So I think that by believing in the office of the king and the idea that they're anointed, that's a later idea developed by the judges. I believe in the idea of the Messiah. But from that perspective, we're not only going to have one Messiah, we're going to have multiple Messiahs, just like we're not going to have one final temple, we're going to have many temples, because the Torah never limited authority to one individual who's never going to die, let's say, or, with a house that he shall dwell in into a total of three. Right.
Mhm.
I mean, that would assume that God would give us a religious lobotomy. And because we can't sin, this is why we're stuck with one temple and one king. But clearly, we do sin. And all these promises seem to be conditional, that only if you do this or if you keep that, you'll be worthy to maintain the throne, the kingdom, the temple, right? That means that we're going to have many kings. This means we're going to have many temples. And that's where I differ mainly from Orthodox Jews today, because most Jews think it's some sort of perpetual Superman Messiah that never dies, right? Which is the Kabbalistic perspective. That even from that perspective, you can't really blame Christians for considering him God. For sure, from that perspective, a man who can't die, a man who can fly, a man who can read your mind is no longer a man. Okay. If anything, he may be a God with a little g. And I know Christians understand this concept because it calls Satan the God of this world. So the idea of gods outside of gods, right? Even though it perhaps doesn't appear in Torah from that perspective, does appear in Christianity. So I don't blame Christians for making him God, because Jews have made this individual a Superman.
Yeah. I mean, I think even, we see it in like in Exodus chapter 7, verse 1. Like this is something like I bring up to a lot of my Christian friends. Like Moses is called God, where Hashem
Mhm.
talks to him, says that I will make you Elohim. And even in the Septuagint, it says, I will make you Theos. So even when you look at like the New Testament, like I'll use the Septuagint, to look at that. And in a lot of our English translations, it'll say like, I have made you like God, as God, or whatever. But I mean, it just says in the original Hebrew that Moses is God. And I think even in Psalms, I think it's 89 or 90, like in the very beginning of the title, like it calls Moses like the man God, So like we can see
Mhm.
this type of divinity, or like as you said, like a lowercase God being applied to another human being, right? I mean, I will still disagree with Christians on to say that Jesus is a person of Hashem, but fully Hashem. That's when it gets really weird. And that idea of like Mashiach acting like that, I think is just totally foreign to the Bible.
Mhm. Would you consider a Christian your brother still if he or she happens to just disagree with you in this aspect of how much the Messiah is or isn't God?
Yeah, I feel like I would because I consider my Jewish people, Orthodox Jews who deny Jesus as the Messiah. I still consider them my brothers and sisters because I agree with you on this. Is the Torah is our foundation. Like in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva, doesn't he? You would know this better than I would. Doesn't he name like 20 people to be a Mashiach?
I'm not familiar with that. But anyways,
Okay.
wait. So you're saying that you find some kinship with Orthodox Jews and like just people who believe in Torah concepts like you do, but someone who happens to be Christian and just disagrees on on Jesus actually being God, like you'd view that as someone not theologically aligned with you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Continue.
Sorry. But okay, let's go into now. Let's talk about proselytizing. Now, I think this is a good
Mm,
idea, and I actually think this is a really amazing thing that you do. I know you get a lot of heat from this because I feel like a lot of Jewish identities almost like gatekeep the idea that, like, we don't want anyone converting, we don't want anyone on our side, you stay over there, we're going to stay Jewish. But what is your view on proselytizing?
Let's do it. Let's go, like the youngsters say. Yeah, my view, I think, is the same one from the inception of Torah. God was a Makarv. He was a missionary. God was pleading with the mixed multitude and the Hebrews, telling him, choose me, choose life, choose Torah. Don't go down that path. Please come down this path. Um, it's hard for anyone. I don't know what kind of defense anyone could in any way thrust against this. Now, I think what I don't do is I don't coerce with intimidation and fear or force, which is, I think, what proselytizing has come to be known as. And this is why people don't know where to place me. They think like, well, we don't believe that you have to be Jewish to be made right with God, right? Which is not true. Jews actually do believe that, but what they call Jewish, they mean Noahide. Um, this is why we're not like Christians, right? But I don't do that. I just let people know that it's possible, and I believe in having an open door policy, and I believe in being inviting and welcoming. That since when is that akin to what you know the ugliness we've seen in proselytizing, like under the Almohads, the Muslims that were forcibly converting people to Islam, or people who were misplaced, told to leave a country like the Catholics did, and Jews in Spain and parts of Portugal because they didn't want people who weren't Christian. It's not the same, So like I think if I ever speak or when I speak to rabbis on this topic and I explain it in such a manner, they won't say I'm right. They just will say that I'm not wrong, right? This is just a way of saying like you got me, because there's nothing in Judaism that prohibits proselytizing. Nothing, unless I claim to be a Kabbalist, and then I'm from the outset. I tell them that I don't justify my practices via Kabbalah, because yes, according to Kabbalah, secretly you're supposed to push Gentiles away just to find out if they're like reincarnated Jews coming back into the fold. You have to get them to prove their Jewishness, because they believe that you can't convert to Judaism. If you do convert, it's because you were a soul, like in some way returning. So we have to in some way sift the real Jewish souls from the fake Jewish souls. But I never let it get that far, because I tell them from the outset I don't really believe in Kabbalah. So yeah, I actively proselytize. I every time I see a Gentile, I see a Jew fighting to get out. And I think that's how we should see the world, not just regarding religion, but the idea of what's good for me is good for others. I'm a Republican. If I see an Antifa member, I want to share the good news of Ronald Reagan and Andrew Tate, Lahavdil. Yeah, it's about caring for people. Okay, in any other instance in life, if like if you had the cure for some disease and the world was dying from it, but you and your family had it, do you think that would be seen as upright, as righteous for you to keep it for yourself? Unless you didn't know what you had and you think that by giving them this it would make them worse, which is honestly, I believe, the attitude most Orthodox Jews have towards Judaism. They view it like a burden that it's hard enough for me to keep. Why would I thrust it on other people? And that opens up another can of worms of why is it so difficult nowadays, and it wasn't so difficult in the times of Rabbi Akiva, right? The Midrashim and Kabbalah. But fine, yeah. So if there's anything you like, if there's a movie I like, right? If there's some kosher restaurant that has amazing shawarma, it's obvious that you want to share it. And if you don't share it, what it does is that it builds resentment. It gets people to think like, you clearly love being Jewish because you won't convert to my religion, but you won't even offer it to me. I guess what you're thinking is that I'm not worthy of it. My family's not worthy of it. And then you're going to come here and lie to me that the reason you don't encourage me to become Jewish is because you think that I don't need Judaism to be righteous. And I guess if they listen to my lectures, they'll come to that realization sooner or later, right? Either with me or without me, that Jews are lying to them. Any Jewish person who says that you could be made righteous before God without Judaism is lying to you. Now, depends what you call Judaism. Judaism is anything that Judaism endorses or espouses. The Noahide laws are part of Judaism. You would never come to the conclusion that there is a universal code of morality like solidified in 7 laws unless you first study the Talmud or the Tosefta, right? So it is the rule according to halakha, according to Talmudic literature, that the only way a Gentile could be considered righteous before God is unless he or she converts to Judaism, if he or she keeps the 7 Noahide laws. And if they want a place in the world to come, they have to keep it because they believe that it has some sort of godly origin. So there's no rabbi who would disagree with that unless they gave their own personal opinion. But according to Talmudic literature, that's a standard. And anyone who doesn't adhere to these 7 Noahide laws have to be decapitated. So any Jewish person that tells you that the reason we don't proselytize is that we believe that all good people will make it to heaven or the world to come, Olam Haba, Gan Eden, whatever, right? Is in some way lying by omission, because they're omitting the fact that in order to be good according to Orthodoxy, you have to become a Noahide, not remain a Christian from their perspective. So the only logical, ethical, moral conclusion is to proselytize. If you don't proselytize, and again, I'm not talking about predatory proselytizing, at least being sweet about your religion and having an open door policy. If you don't do that, then you don't care for your neighbors. And one can even say that you have disdain for them. That's the only conclusion you can come to. The problem is most Orthodox Jews don't debate or talk to people who disagree with them much. So they'll never have to give a response to anything I just said here. This is what I love to do. I get them on the stand, right? I mean, I have a yeshivish background. I could speak yeshivish, and I could get them to conclude on camera that what I'm saying is true. That the reason they don't process. Sorry. You got me?
I got you. You're
yeah. Sorry, my alarm went off. That the reason they don't proselytize is because they just don't care. Okay, and that's the truth. Continue.
okay. So what does the Talmud and like the rabbis, what have they said about proselytizing? Like, is it fully conversion, or is it just basically like kind of just, hey, follow the Noahide laws, or is that really kind of just like Kabbalah?
Okay, so that's not Kabbalah. Kabbalah in some way threw gasoline on the fire. The notion of the 7 Noahide laws is a rabbinic idea. The Noahide movement is a Kabbalistic idea. The Noahide movement was invented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That means the idea that we have this task to make the world Noahide today came from Chabad, because Chabad feels that they are living in the Messianic age. Right? These laws appear in a book in Mishnah Torah of the Rambam called Hilchos Malachim. And in this book, right, it talks about Yamot HaMashiach, the Messianic age, the Messiah, like anything to do with like Yamot HaMashiach, right? Because it deals with how do we relate to the world once the Messiah is already here, right? The duties of the Messiah, building the temple, bringing the dispersed back. So because Chabad feels that they're living in this era, they began this movement of going out and spreading Noahide laws. This is why before Chabad, no one ever did this. There's no instance in the Talmud of rabbis going out trying to make people Noahides. As a matter of fact, there's no historical evidence of there ever being a Noahide community ever. Right? So it seems, even from a Talmudic perspective, that it was a theoretical idea. Like, maybe, what if? As a matter of fact, there's 2 statements in the Talmud that says that God abolished the Noahide laws, and they always exclude those when they teach the Noahide laws, because and also the Talmud is not clear that it's only 7 laws. It's only one opinion. It's 7 laws. Maimonides liked that opinion, and everyone liked Maimonides. So now we think, keep the 7, go to heaven. Right? It's that shallow. So What was your question?
So just like we're in the Talmud, like kind of like about the Noahide
Oh
laws
yeah,
and
okay.
proselytizing.
So now, not specifically about the Noahide laws, but laws that Gentiles have to keep. Right? It seems that the Talmud presents it as the bare minimum that separates Gentiles from animals. That's the bare minimum that you have to keep if you're going to live amongst Israel. That's what a Noahide means. It means ger toshav. A ger toshav is a resident alien. It means they could only really exist in the land. Like what we see nowadays is some neo Noahide movement that it's built off the back of Kabbalists, because it departs from the idea of ger toshav. A ger toshav means like a stranger that resides where? In the land of Israel. This is why they're adjudicated in the land of Israel by a court that's typically established by the Sanhedrin. Now, it could spread like during the Messianic age, but that's from that perspective, it wouldn't be under the auspices of Jews anymore. Like, it would be Gentiles adjudicating themselves. So in the Talmud, I would say that for the most part, it's very pro-proselytizing. Although there's probably one or two statements that speak derogatory towards Gentiles. Like the idea that converts are like a sore, like a sapachat, like tsaras in the side of Israel. It's a statement said not in the Mishnah, by the way. It's said like in Talmud Bavli by Namara, like quite like a quite recent statement. I mean, it's not really grounded by anything authoritative. But overall, it says conversions took a day. It says that the reason we're in exile, like in Pesachim Pei Zayin, it says that Rabbi Asher says that the reason we're in exile is only to acquire converts. People completely lose sight of this. Yeah, no, for the most part, I would say it's probably like 80-20. 20% of the opinions are in some like slightly derogatory, and 80% are pro the idea of outsiders coming in. Like none of them are against the idea of outsiders coming in, but some of them, these 20% get you to be a little skeptical and to kind of turn the vetting up, right? But it says Hillel converted people in one day, right? And there's no other standard, like in the Talmud. I mean, it says that the whole world's going to convert to Judaism in Masechet Berachot. It says why? Because when the prophets talk about that the nations are going to worship God with pure lips, the rabbis teach that that's Hebrew, and it's a sign that the world's going to convert to Judaism. So yes, I mean, for the most part, and that's the only way we could ever only gauge rabbinic literature is who says this more, who says it less, and for the most part, just because it's always going to be a mixed bag of ideas.
Okay, and then I mean, I like what you said, even to like the comparison of it. Like when you hear something, and you think it's amazing and it's good. Like if you go to a restaurant, like you have a meal and you think it's fantastic, or if you see a movie, it's fantastic. You're going to tell other people, and you want other people to partake in this. And I think it's I have a video talking about like one law theology, where I bring up as you just brought up too a little while back of the great crowd that basically came with Israel when they were leaving Exodus, right? Like when they were leaving Egypt during the Exodus, right? There's a great crowd with them, and we read so many times even during the law of this is for Israel and the sojourner that is among you. So we see even God wanting the Gentile, the other nations, different people to be a part of his covenant, and we see even in Psalms, I believe it's 119, where it talks about like the Israel being a light to the other nations. They see it, they think it's good, and then they're also welcomed to be a part of it. So it's almost weird that this type of gatekeeping like goes on, because if this is, I agree with you. I think Judaism is an amazing religion, and we should be promoting it more and be more welcoming into it. You know what I mean?
Let's do it. Let's go. Let's go, like the youngsters say.
Yeah. Now, real quick. So, because I think a lot of people kind of get confused with the Noahide laws. Like, how did this really come up? Like, how did, like, I know you brought up like the one opinion, and it's not just necessarily the seven, but, we don't read this anywhere within scripture. Like we see kind of like the commandments that slowly come up like through Genesis, right? Of He commands Moses to take the clean and the unclean, onto the boat. He commands Cain not to sin, but then there is what is transgression of what is sin? Sin is transgression of the law, breaking the law. But the law wasn't given until the whole Exodus point.
Mhm.
So we almost see these quote unquote laws being revealed in the New Testament, but we never see something of the Noahide. We don't see anything of like the 7 specific ones. So how do you think the rabbis kind of pick these 7?
Uh-huh. Well, they didn't. Again, there's a debate. I mean, how did that group of rabbis decide on the 7 versus 30? We don't know exactly. The idea of the Noahide laws makes sense. The idea that you can't adjudicate people who haven't accepted the Torah by the whole Torah if they're living in the land of Israel, I think really has its roots on that portion of the Torah where it says that Gentiles living in the land, you're allowed to give them nevela, which is like animals that die on their own. Like you shouldn't eat this, but you could give it to like that type of ger. So that leads people to believe that there might be some other standard, but the Torah only gave one standard. I mean, the Torah standard. God made no distinction between laws. The problem is when people started classifying it as the fourth holy house of Israel. Right? I mean, you have Levium, you have Kohanim, you have Israel, and now you have Noahides. This is where the problem began. Not the idea that if we're going to allow people to live in our land in biblical Israel who haven't accepted the Torah, that they have to adhere to some minimal standard. That makes sense. The problem is Midrash and Kabbalah that took the 7 Noahide laws and they mystified it. They're saying, no, no, no. 6 laws were given to Adam and the 7th law was given to Noah. And this is why there's many Noahides in Texas that say they started like a breakaway movement there that feels that it's superior to remain a Noahide than convert to Judaism because they're closer to Adam. Right? It's stupid. It's stupid. But like most mystical ideas, it started off as a practical one that made sense for legal purposes. And, with affluence and boredom over time, it became like a mystical, like full blown religion. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, that basically answers. All right, that makes sense. So, you brought up Maimonides before. A lot of people know him famously as the Rambam. Why do you think the Rambam is so famous? How did he become so famous? Like,
He's
because
the only,
there's so many rabbis like Rashi, the Ramban, who kind of wrote commentaries, and so many different rabbis within the Talmud itself. But the Rambam is like, I feel, I don't want to say the pillar. Maybe I will say the pillar of Judaism. But like, how did he get so popular?
because he codified all of Jewish law. That's the only answer. He was the only rabbi to ever codify all of Jewish law. And most things in the rabbinical world, they only gain speed once they're accepted by the scholars, by the rabbis. So once the scholars validated Maimonides as the man to codify all of Jewish law, then like good sheep, like everyone else just followed suit. Just like nowadays, people say, "Oh, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the biggest tzaddik of our generation." Have you ever read anything the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote? Do you know anything about Lubavitcher? No, the reason you're saying it is because you heard some Chabad rabbi say it. So, because the scholars appreciated Maimonides, those who weren't scholars who just try to emulate the scholars said, "Yeah, we like him also." But most people who in some way embellish the idea of Maimonides never study his legal texts, right? I mean, Chabad is one of these organizations, like anything philosophical, anything that like in any way goes against Chabad, right? In terms of Mishnah Torah, they just don't hold by. But it's popular to say that we like Maimonides nowadays because it gets you labeled as a philosopher. But that doesn't mean that people agree with Maimonides. And I don't agree with Maimonides in every instance, but I think for the most part, I agree more with Maimonides than most Jews do. Mainly because he lacks that Kabbalistic aspect that post-dated him.
Now, what do you mean by like he codified the law?
Okay, so Mishnah Torah is a complete codification of all of Jewish law, which means that he went through all the authoritative texts of Jewish law, whether it's the Mishnah, Tosefta, and with the other texts, and he extracted practical law from it. Right. The bulk of rabbinic literature is midrash and agadah. It's just folklore and legends, stories that get misconstrued or sometimes told over accurately by people who don't like us just to make us look bad. Right. That's not the law. Like we don't even have to believe in these stories. However, the parts of Talmudic literature we have to believe in are the ones that tell you to do something or not to do something. Things that are prescriptive, not just descriptive. That becomes halacha. Right. If there's a portion in the Talmud that tells us how to keep Shabbat, that's something ruled by the court. This is how you do it, right? That becomes halakha, and everything else is just fluff. So what a codifier does was that he goes in there and he extracts all the do's and don'ts and he puts them in a book. And in his case, in a book called Mishnah Torah, just so you don't have to cut through so much fluff to get to the meat. He just gave you the meat, and he did it with all of Jewish law, everything, things that have to do with sacrifices, mixing wool and linen, everything. While the other codifiers or compilers of Jewish law, like Shulchan Aruch, basically built off what the Rambam did and only kept things that are applicable today. But the bedrock of complete Jewish law is Maimonides. That's what made him the Rambam. That's, if it wasn't for that, he would not be influential. Now, because he did that, his other books were also studied, like Mar Nevuchim, The Guide for the Perplexed, which I think solidified him as a philosopher. It's a little bit out there. I don't think it aligns with what most Jews believe today, right? But because he was able to justify his existence with his heavy stuff, he could in some ways sneak in like some of his fluff. Yeah.
Okay. So what exactly is then, like, so Mishnah Torah is just basically his interpretation? Is it of strictly just Jewish law, or is he giving commentary, like not commentary, but like is it talking about the Torah or the entire Tanakh altogether?
So Mishnah Torah today, the way it's printed, is not the way it was printed near the time of Maimonides. Mishnah Torah used to be connected to what's called Sefer HaMitzvot. So the book of commandments that we have today of Maimonides that goes through the 613 commandments and gives an explanation on them was actually part of Mishnah Torah. Now, according to, I think, with the Hassan Sofer, they split it into two books just so the printers can make more money. So one could say that Mishnah Torah included a commentary on the Torah's commandments, and then it introduced every rabbinic ordinance attached to it. So then all you would need to be a kosher Jew is just Mishnah Torah. That's all you would need. That's it. Like you would have the commandments that are from the Torah and the commandments that are from the rabbis. And that's pretty much it.
That's okay. So then now about the 13 principles, because I know that's also tied to him too. Now, is that also in Mishnah Torah, or is the whole 13 principles something different? And then also, what are the 13 principles?
So the 13 principles of the Rambam do not appear in Mishnah Torah. They appear in his Parsha Mishnayot. In his commentary to the Mishnah, there's a section called Chaylik, which deals with that portion in Sanhedrin that talks about people sharing the world to come. He has an introduction to Perek Chaylik because in this portion it talks about essentially core Jewish beliefs like the resurrection of the dead, and prophecy, the Messiah, and it's not his opinion. He's basically trying to extract principles of belief amongst the Jewish people, at least at that time, and that's where the 13 principles came from. Right? The 13 principles we have now is not really put together by the Rambam. That's some sort of abridgment. We don't really know who abridged them in such a simple form, but it's actually big sections that you could get on Safaria on every principle. But yes, it doesn't appear in Mishnah Torah. The principles that include belief in God, belief that the Torah is unchanged, belief in prophecy, the distinction between the prophecy of Moses. The core beliefs, not from a Torah perspective, but from a Jewish perspective. I mean, colloquially, this is what he believed a Jew must believe, just because they don't appear in the Talmud as set over by one teacher. It's just taking different opinions of what people believed at the time, and then he put it together. So even back then, it wasn't a core belief. It says that Hillel the Amara, not Hillel Zaken, believed that the Messiah wasn't coming because he already came. That would violate one of the Rambam's 13 principles. But where Yosef Albo in Sefer Arikarim makes that point that, you know what, according to the Rambam, would he be an Apocoris because he doesn't believe it? So, no, of course not. It's because the Rambam never thought that only because he in some way codified these 13 principles as they appear in Perchelik, that people would feel that no matter where you go, if you don't adhere to these 13 principles, you're not adhering to Judaism. It was his personal opinions for his community. And there's many people who attack the Rambam on this. There's a rabbi called Mark Shapiro. He wrote a book called The Limits of Orthodox Theology. He's an Orthodox rabbi in Pennsylvania who he speaks about the rabbis who disagreed with Maimonides on his 13 principles, like the Ravid, right? Moshe Taku. There's what to be said on it. So I appreciate the Rambam. There are some principles I disagree with as principles, right? And those people who want to argue with me on like what you're going against the 13 principles of the Rambam, they have to acknowledge the Rambam himself to codify anything like that. He wasn't a Tana, right? I mean, he didn't sit on the Sanhedrin. He didn't have smicha. This is just his opinion. And those who live in the realm of Art Scroll Judaism will kind of just look what Art Scroll has to say about it or see what's popular just to condemn other people. When, you know, Jews, Torah practicing Jews come in all shapes and colors and, you know, preferences. And as long as you keep the oral law, which is what you do, that came from the Sanhedrin, and you adhere to the principles that appear in the written law, which is the Torah, that's what makes you a kosher Jew.
Okay. Now, earlier we talked about, or you brought up Remez of different, you know, a different way to basically read or interpret the Bible itself. Now, there's an interesting concept I thought was super cool when I first learned about it, called Pardes. You know, it's the acronym for basically how to read and interpret Scripture. Can you talk about that? Talk about those four letters that are brought up, what they each mean, and how they are used to interpret the Torah.
So the word Pardes in Hebrew means orchard. It first appears in the Talmud. There's a story of a few rabbis. One of them was Rabbi Akiva, another one was Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, and I believe two other people who went through Pardes, some sort of I don't know, time warp black hole, where a specific type of wisdom was revealed to them. And some of these people couldn't take it. Like one of them went completely crazy. Like some of them just like one became an apocoris, like Asher, like Rabbi Asher ben Abuya. And it says that Rabbi Akiva came out intact, you know, philosophically, religiously intact. It doesn't say anything else about this place in the Talmud. However, in Kabbalistic literature, it took the word Pardes, which again we don't know enough about because it doesn't explain enough about it in the Talmud, and they split it into four categories of authoritative interpretation. But this is post the 13th century. And it's Pashat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. Pashat is like the simple literal meaning, right? Like in Aramaic, they say Pashita for something simple, right? Pashat, Remez is hints, like foreshadowings. How a Christian says, I see Jesus here. How an Orthodox Jew says that this verse, you know, alludes to this later concept, right? That's what remez is. Drash means like contextually reading the text, using other books, like cross-referencing. You'll take a word as it's defined in Genesis and you will apply it to Deuteronomy, right? Kind of building a theological puzzle, but using the text alone, you know, from the drash, I mean, from the text. And sod is secrets. Like it's not even there. The Holy Spirit told you, you know, like a trance, like some magid, some, I don't know, angel, demon possessed you. So I have no issue with Pashat, and I have no issue with Drash. The issues I have is with Remez and Sod. Now again, this vehicle for interpretation is post the 13th century. It didn't exist in Talmudic times. Like if it did exist, it wasn't called that. And it's been used as a tool to introduce new ideas. I mean, what do you think Rem is? I mean, like someone could say that Muhammad is on every page of the Torah. So, I mean, based on a dream you had last night, now that you can give over Torah truths and people have to believe you. It's essentially a tool to disorganize religion, right? Well, I mean, from their perspective, I mean, they're trying to unify their or our belief system under their banner. But for those who are going to push back, it's just going to cause chaos and division. So I'm very, very much against it from an authoritative perspective. If someone wants to say, I had a dream, that's fine, right? Martin Luther King had a dream. The problem is, you can't say, only because I came to some conclusion, you must also. I mean, from that perspective, it becomes a tyranny. And the only authority that exists in the Jewish world is with what literally appears in the 5 books of Moses, or what the Sanhedrin rules into existence, as long as it doesn't contradict or violate the Torah. That's it. And those rulings never include metaphysical ideas, just practical ones. Like, how do you keep Shabbat? How do you establish the month? How do you keep Yom Kippur? And on and on. So I don't like the idea of parties.
Okay. Now, concerning like the two big guys who have given their commentaries, like Rashi and the Ramban, they give very different commentaries. How are their commentaries given in like the form of pardas? Like, who uses what more often?
Oh, I don't think they knew of the concept. The concept of pardes, don't forget, the like Rashi existed before the Rambam, and the Ramban existed before the Zohar. They believed in mystical ideas, problematic mystical ideas, but it wasn't built off of what we call Kabbalah nowadays. So like Rashi's known for giving a midrashic commentary. He'll just take like any agarata and apply it to a verse to give you the definitive meaning of that verse. And the Ramban will throw in a lot of mystical concepts. I'm not a fan of any of their commentaries. I think Dennis Prager's Rational Bible could take them all to school. I don't like when people like elevate titles like Rashi. I mean, these people who use Rashi like this had never read Rashi, and if they did read Rashi, they didn't read any other commentator. Okay, we have to stop elevating people just because of like these names. I I want to do like a Pepsi challenge, like on people. Like the Pepsi challenge was like they would put 2 soda cans or like 2 cups of cola, right? Where they look the same, and they taste both of them, and they'll tell you which one they like, and then they lift over the other box, and it shows like they either like Pepsi, like or they like Coke, right? I would like to do that with a modern day commentary. I would even do that with a Christian commentary, okay? And Rashi. Give someone, I mean, that's something you should do on this channel, by the way. I mean, on your channel, take your favorite Christian commentator and take Rashi and give a commentary. Say, look, we have 2 rabbis here. Which commentary appeals more to you? I'm not going to tell you what the rabbi is, but tell me on the same verse which commentary, or which comment appeals more to you, and see what the people choose. I would do that with Dennis Prager's Rational Bible. Okay, and I could almost guarantee they're always going to choose Dennis Prager. The problem is people have to toe the line. They have to conform that, if you say Lubavitcher Rebbe, if you say Rashi, it's like the tops and the tops, but they never read these books, right? If the goal is to progress, okay, I have no issue accepting a Christian's commentary on a specific verse if it brings you closer to God, right? If it makes more sense to me. I don't care about titles. But in terms of Rashi, yes, like Rashi's understood for being the midrashic interpretation of the Torah. The Ramban is a more mystically inclined. I mean, he's not completely mystically inclined, but there's many others. The Ibn Ezra, the Rashbam. I don't know. Commentaries are clearly optional to believe. They have nothing to do with the oral law, because someone will say, yo, Rashi's part of the oral law. Rashi's not part of the oral law. He's a commentator. How could he be part of the oral law, right? I guess if he comments on the Talmud like he does, right, he's commenting on the oral law, right? But you can disregard Rashi and not disregard the oral law, and that includes with the Ramban and anyone else. The oral law is the Mishnah. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I know you have your problems with them, but out of those two, out of Ramban and Rashi, which one do you gravitate more towards?
I don't study them. I mean, I've read them, but I don't study them. That means I don't read the Parsha with Rashi. It's kind of hard to find a Chumash without Rashi in it. But if I do anything, I'll do the Rashbam. I just don't. I don't like view it as mandatory reading.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's popular mainly because they're the only. The Ramban's commentary and Rashi's commentary are the two most popular commentaries translated into English. You could get it even in Spanish, right? And this is why it's popular. But from what I've read, I'm not impressed. I'm just not impressed. I think it's better to study the Torah on its own without commentary. Without commentary. I mean, I have a video on every parsha, and I always state that no commentaries were harmed in making these videos. Right? It's just straight what the Torah is trying to tell me. I don't care. Now, sometimes um they're helpful from an academic perspective, which is really what the role of the commentary to a Bible should be, right? This word means this, the origin of this word is that. Okay, that for sure, I would have no issue getting Rashi's perspective. But just because his commentary exists, it deserves praise? Nah, nah. Nah, I think that a rabbi could arise today that's bigger than Rashi. Of course, people would disagree with that because there's a mystical idea called Yeridat Hadorot, that they think that any rabbi that exists today by definition is going to be less than a rabbi who came before. Stupid idea. You know, especially with in my pocket, I could walk around with a library that's bigger than like what existed in the time of Rashi, like a Jewish library. It just doesn't. Let's go. That's it. Let's go. Hawk
So
to a
with
point. I'm kidding.
yeah, with kind of like all that being said, so what do you think Christians really misunderstand about the Talmud, about the Mishnah, Mishnah Torah, like some of these other things that they um commentaries from rabbis, the Rambam himself, like what do Christians really misunderstand about all this?
Systematic theology, and most Jews don't even know it exists. There's a there's a systematic way of understanding Judaism that's never taught nowadays. The idea that's typically taught is like everything that's rabbinic was given on Mount Sinai. Everything from the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, everything was given on Mount Sinai. And if like you're questioning anything, their response is that it's my Masorah, right? You know, and that Masorah always goes back to Mount Sinai. I mean, it's equivalent to when you're arguing with a Christian and they say the Holy Spirit told me, right? You can't argue with the Holy Spirit. Who am I to argue with the Holy Spirit? Who am I to argue with some tradition that your family received on Mount Sinai? That doesn't exist. Okay. The systematic theology, and I think Christians miss this, is I think they leave out the role of the judge. The role of the judge in the Torah is such a important role. It's not just the king, it's not just the priest and the prophet, it's the judge. There's a whole book called Shoftim, the book of the judges, right? Who are these judges and what authority do they have in some way shaping our Jewish existence? And the answer is a lot of authority. Um, I think Christians, when they think of rabbis, they think of Pharisees. And nowhere in the Talmud do the rabbis in the Talmud ever identify as Pharisees. So there's no reason why we should claim that, especially when we're living in Christian countries, and these Christians feel that the Pharisees had a hand in unaliving Jesus. Right? The rabbis in the Talmud made fun of Pharisees. We have nothing to do with Pharisees. I mean, apart from that, we both believed in the oral law. Um, the oral law is just a consensus of the judges that even Jesus would have revered as authoritative. Right? I mean, the Pharisees and the scribes, they sit in Moses' seat. You have to do what they tell you to do. Just don't do as they do because they're a bunch of hypocrites. Okay, that means there was a consensus for Israel on how to move forward ceremonially, not how to love God or who's the Messiah or any trivial topic like that. From a earthly perspective, right? It's trivial. If we came up with our conclusion, because the Torah is the only authority on anything metaphysical from that perspective, right? But on how do we progress as a people in ceremonial law? Right. So people in the Christian world just view anything rabbinic as completely man-made, and it might be man-made, but it's man-made and authorized and sanctioned from the Torah. That means the Torah knew that the judges made mistakes, right? That they were flawed. but for the sake of progress and unity and consensus, he established his court to help Israel move forward. So we can agree how we're going to make tefillin. So we can agree how do we slaughter animals. So we can agree with an agree. I think Christianity could only really flourish in exile when there's no need for unity. Right? Israel can't move forward without unity. Israel, the nation of Israel, and I'm not talking about the state of Israel, biblical Israel needed consensus in order to move forward. And I think this is the main point that Christians like misunderstand when trying to understand rabbinic literature. Rabbinic literature is the consensus of people living in biblical Israel on how to keep ceremonial commandments in the land. It's a consensus. And those laws outnumber any metaphysical explanation to anything in the Torah. It's the do's and don'ts because this affects you on a daily basis. I think this is what Christians miss, that it's a necessity. The oral law is a necessity, even though I myself am not convinced that the whole oral law was given at Mount Sinai. Not that does it ever appear in the Mishnah. Nowhere in the Mishnah does it say that the oral law was given at Mount Sinai. It's a later legend. What we can all agree on is that it came either from or through the Sanhedrin. That's it. And the Sanhedrin, God told Moses to establish a court of 70 elders, right? These elders had different names, the Zakanim, Shovtim, Anshe Knesset, the Gedolah, the Sanhedrin. It's this court that had authority. If you view the oral law as just the consensus, i.e. the court, then I don't know why Christians don't study them more and realizing, okay, I don't care what their opinions on like Yeshua is, right? I mean, not that the Talmud ever talks about Yeshua. I don't think Yeshua knows who's Yeshua. However, it's like these they are going to try to help us keep Shabbat in a unified manner, right? It's going to tell us how to slaughter animals. It's going to tell us how to establish the new moon. They came up with the idea that we have to even look for the moon. Nowhere in the Torah did it say that it's only the moon, right? The judges came up with this. So I think that's what Christians miss the most, and that's the rule or the role of the court, of the judges.
So it's really interesting too, because I actually agree with you on that. I believe that the oral law, I don't think it was given. God spoke to Moses and said, "Hey, I'm going to give you these separate laws, not to be written down, but to be transcribed orally." Because, like, I agree with you. When we look at like the 70 elders during that Sanhedrin at the time, a lot of those laws were given, where God even says, like, have them decide what to do. And it just, I think, logically makes sense, because if you have like 70 of the wisest, smartest people in any country come together to come up with rules and regulations, is it going to be perfect? No, but I think it's going to be like 99% perfect. Now, so I agree with you on that. And I want your question. I have a question regarding the Torah portion of Jethro, because we even see my argument is too, I don't think all of the oral law was given necessarily from the Sanhedrin, but also Moses goes to his father-in-law, even asks him for advice, and Jethro gives it to him. So like, this is not from God, another angel, but this is from Jethro, who is not part of the Sanhedrin. And I believe Moses uses that also. Would you agree with that too? Or do you think it's like only from the Sanhedrin?
Okay, so there's many different Sanhedrins. I mean, Sanhedrin just essentially means court. Mm-hmm. The Sanhedrin that's justified in Deuteronomy chapter 17, or the elders that God told Moses to establish 70 of them, is what we call the Beit Din Hagadol, the great Sanhedrin. But every tribe had their own court, and that's really what I think Jethro's advice is alluding to, that make princes like amongst the peoples. And that's, I mean, every tribe had their own Sanhedrin. However, the great Sanhedrin were the ones who established rabbinic laws, while the other ones were just there adjudicating. Right? For example, the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, was the only one that could unalive people. Right? They were the only ones who could create a new law. And it's similar to the way the judicial system works in America, that these smaller courts essentially can't override the Supreme Court, but they're there to, in some way, enforce the Constitution and laws put forth by the Supreme Court. So yeah, no, for sure. See, the thing is, this isn't a science. Okay, these are just theories, but it's a response. Instead of saying, no, I believe everything was given at Mount Sinai, I think that's a dumbification of Judaism. People just say that because they don't have the energy or maybe the know-how to explain how it actually works. What I'm giving over is the Rambam's opinion. And this is one reason that the Rambam's the Rambam, because he broke everything down on how it actually works. Now we're living the dumbification of Judaism, that Kabbalah came in and, because in an attempt to justify the Zohar as holy, as given on Mount Sinai, they justify everything as given on Mount Sinai, and then this gave really the birth of Karaite Judaism, which I think, I don't consider them kosher Jews from a halakhic perspective, but I understand their concern that these people are coming here and saying they're changing the Torah, like with midrashim, and saying that their own rulings were given on Mount Sinai. So it seems like they're standing up for the integrity of the Torah. Yeah. So I think that you could be in the middle and say, yeah, like I accept the what people call the oral law, i.e. halacha, just because the Mishnah also never calls it the oral law, right? But I'm also like not a Kabbalist and not a Karaite.
Okay. So last question, just because I know we're running short on time. Can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus at the same time? That he's the
Yes.
Messiah?
Yes, although I would say most rabbis would disagree with me. I don't think they could really put up a defense. You know, if you could, please contact me and debate me on this. Right? I mean, I have no turtle in this race. Right? I'm an Orthodox Jew. My kids are in Orthodox schools. I live in like in Hollywood, Florida, very Orthodox community. Um, so I don't validate Christianity. I do validate Messianic Judaism. Why? Because what unites us as Jews is Torah observance, oral law, written law. Who you believe the Messiah is, in my opinion, I mean, like you could think is the like the bee's knees. It's the most important thing. It doesn't really matter. It's how I view you. I think it's a secondary notion. Even if you believe this Messiah had divine qualities, secondary in my opinion, on how you keep any of the commandments. So, from that perspective, if a Messianic Jew or a Messianic believer in Yeshua converts to Judaism, he would be a Messianic Jewish person, and I would count them in a minion, just like I would count a nutty Kabbalist in a minion. If I'm forced, because I don't disagree with like I don't agree with Messianic Jews on their rendition of Jesus and what the New Testament has to say, but I think we agree more than we disagree on Torah. All right, like on what the Torah has to say on any given issue. So if I have to tolerate Kabbalists who view the existence in a wackier way than I think Messianics do, like we should be able to tolerate Messianics as well. So yes, if you wanted to convert to Judaism, I would convert you to Judaism, assuming that you accept oral law, written law, and you build a huge Orthodox community. I don't care about the term Orthodox, but Torah observant community, right? And on the side of all that, you could have your personal beliefs of Yeshua. It doesn't bother me.
I think my biggest problem, I think, with a lot of Messianic Jews is what they like their negative opinions are of the rabbis, like Rashi, the Rambam, everything like that, from just commentaries from philosophers, everything like that. What they will say about the Mishnah, the Talmud, like I just know a lot of Messianic Jews, especially like the MJAA, and they will talk bad on all these traditions, and they will basically kind of say what you'll say is, hey, but we're Torah observant. But even that sounds a little contradictory, because I know a lot where in their synagogues they will have bookstores on Shabbat that they sell, and they make money, which um then after synagogues they'll go out to eat,
Mhm.
they'll go to a golf course, which costs money.
Mhm.
So I get it where they're like Jewish, I guess, by identity or by ethnicity, but to kind of keep that Torah observance, it's almost like they share the idea with a lot of Christians of, as long as I believe in Jesus, I get to do whatever I want. So I
Right.
think for
Yeah.
me, that's kind of my only
I'm not
problem.
talking about those people, by the way. Like those people, I'm not talking about. All right, good.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because they will identify themselves as Messianic Jews,
Mhm.
when it's like, really, like what part of Jewish are you? Like, you say shalom, you go to a congregation on Saturday morning, but besides that, you know, how Jewish are you? I think that'd be like my only really big concern.
Mhm. Okay, no, that makes sense. In terms of disagreeing with Rashi, let's be honest. Look, like if you believe in Yeshua and there's a rabbi crapping on the whole notion that you happen to believe on, I think you have the right to be upset at these rabbis and push back. Okay, only because it's Rashi, only because he exists doesn't mean he deserves your respect. You have to, yeah, and there's many Jews who are misnagid, who don't believe in Kabbalah, or like in this case Hasidut, and they will attack Hasidim, and Hasidim will attack them, and they're both kosher Jews. Right. So, I mean, you don't have to agree with everyone, especially if they're attacking your theology. So, yeah.
I think more of they'll say that they don't like them just because they're rabbinic, right? Like they like I really don't know them where they can bring up a point where Rashi says this. I disagree with Rashi on it. You know, like okay, Isaiah 53, the whole suffering servant. Instead of saying Rashi says this, I would disagree with him because it says this and X, Y, and Z. But I think a lot of them dismiss the fact that, well, he's rabbinic. He, you know, everything like that. They will dismiss that fact. So, you know,
Well,
that's just me,
I
though.
get it. I get it. Well, anything
But
else?
hey,
Let's do it.
Rabbi Asher, though, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Thanks for answering my questions. Thanks for allowing me to interview you. I appreciate it. And guys, any social media, Google even Rabbi Asher Meza. He's always live on TikTok. Oh, he's go on up, debate him. He loves it. He loves talking about this
That's
stuff.
what I do.
So,
Let's do it.
all
Let's
right,
go. Let's go.
awesome. And actually, Rabbi, I'm definitely going to take you up on that because I have all three of Dennis Prager's books on his commentary. I wish he would come out with one for Leviticus and Numbers, but
I think he did. No.
I only have the three. Maybe he did come out with them.
Yeah, I think he's done with all of them, but I don't think like they're printed yet.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, and I will see you guys on the next one. Shalom.